Hi, my name is Cinda, and I'm going to provide the point of view of the forest landowner as a host for large-scale ground-mounted solar. I grew up in a family that valued the environment. I was sent to the Hitchcock Nature Camp as a kid, and I went to work with my dad to the tree farm business, sold blueberries at the end of my driveway, did most of my growing up in the woods of Lake Wyola, did a lot of fishing and skiing, went to Maine for college, and then to DC. And I ran divisions of nonprofit organizations like Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Forest Foundation, the Wood Council. Dad said I was so good at running nonprofits, I should come home and run the sawmill. That's nonprofit too, he said. So I did. And a year after I got home, it burned to the ground, struck by lightning. We rebuilt it, bigger, better than ever, and it still didn't make money. And we auctioned it at $1 million loss 8 years later. Really proud of how, with the Kestrel Land Trust, we conserved the largest private conservation project in history at that time. And we named it for my recently deceased father, Paul C. Jones Working Forest. Also in 2012, after 12 years of effort, we built 2 large-scale solar projects with partners. Today, the biggest threat and opportunity is the global climate emergency, and we all need to do all we can to help. There are hundreds of sites in 30 towns in Western Mass that I can use to help combat climate change. I am doing this with land conservation and ground-mounted solar. I completely agree that solar belongs in built environments first and previously disturbed places. This should be incentivized. The picture here is of Kohl's Building Supply with a lot of solar on the roofs. In 2020, when we added 2,000 more conservation acres, we kept out pockets for solar. We had talked to the solar companies and found out where they could locate, where it made sense. And we conserved 10 times that amount of land as they were going to develop for solar. And we think that's a pretty cool balance. Because we have managed industrial forests for so long, we don't build roads or houses. Most of our land is considered to be in the biomap area. Most of Western Mass is in the biomap area because it's rural and largely undeveloped. We don't deserve any fewer pilot payment opportunities or hosting opportunities. We need to get realistic about solar siting in Western Mass. The towns where investors can build are within a mile or 2 of connection distance because it's $1 million a mile. Towns are 90% forested out here, and they have not a lot of parking lots or rooftops. Most of Western Mass is rural. Patches of solar in the forest is the only way to go. We're doing 10-to-1 conservation. Mass needs to get real about what sites they've identified are actually possible. Less than 1/3 of the DOER map is practicable. Mass Audubon and Harvard Forest didn't like the conclusion that we need a lot of ground-mounted solar. So they said, if you give us $1 billion, and if we have all the time in the world, we will connect with millions of property owners, retrofit and improve their roofs, and rebuild parking lots. And then you won't have to put a lot of gigawatts in the field and in the woods. But that's not true. The DOER maps show land that is conserved. All of our 5,500 acres of conservation land cannot have solar on them, but it says we can. It says you can put in solar on the Quabbin, and that's not okay. Less than 30% of the rooftops work because of the age, condition, power upgrades necessary, and the inability to cut other people's trees. Parking lots are shown as possible, but costs are prohibitive. The steel required is huge. The cost environmentally is ridiculous when you consider recycling all the asphalt that's existing, pouring new asphalt 30% larger, covering the land, and installing all that steel. Do you want a parking lot for the next 20 or 30 years? Few people could say they do. The DOER maps didn't account for all the practical and economic decisions necessary, like connection costs, substation capacity, line congestion, cost to upgrade, installation expenses, willing hosts, willing funders. You can't designate where solar goes. Solar tells us where it needs to go. So this is an interesting chart from the conference. This is how much ground-mounted solar we need. This is how much small ground-mounted solar we need. This is how much rooftop and canopy. So if you add canopy, rooftop, and small ground together, it's about half the amount of large-scale solar we need. Audubon and Harvard didn't like that, and the fact of it has to go in the woods of Western Mass. So they said, we need 16 gigawatts of ground-mounted solar today. We're going to fix that. They said, if you give us $1 billion and a lot of time, we will put it all on rooftops and parking lots. Or that's the impression that the public had when they heard this announcement. The fact is that they can go from 16 gigawatts to 13 gigawatts, but they still need 13 gigawatts of solar on the ground in the forests. So there's not enough time. Maybe you can come up with $1 billion, but you're still going to have 13 gigawatts of ground-mounted solar in the woods. The biggest challenge to meeting climate goals for me is time. Solar projects have willing hosts and willing investors, and it takes us 10 years and millions of dollars to permit. The abutter challenges are hard. There are personal attacks. I've had a death threat. There's state government bias against tree cutting and therefore the reality of the situation. There's an embargoed state report that says that managed forests are critical for sustainability in a time of increased storm events. Activists are joining planning boards and conservation commissions. They're passing petitions to stop solar. All these are delaying our necessary response time. We need to be pragmatic and expeditious. We need to stop taking public opinion polls about where people want solar and make siting decisions based on science. Rural towns need income streams and want green community status. And we need to compensate forest landowners. If they are more valuable than solar, pay it. We need both. We need conserved land and we need ground-mounted solar. We can do this simultaneously. I consider best practices to be partnering with agriculture and pollinators, appreciating that 98% of a solar site is thriving environmentally. Under the solar panels, there's only 2% covered by solid posts. This creates necessary edge and early successional habitat that migratory birds need to successfully migrate. We're partnering with UMass and other institutions to assure excellent site analysis and accountability. We've signed on to participate in studies of groundwater if grants are received by UMass scientists. There are community solar local benefits, concerns about well supplies, water supplies, well runoff are covered through permitting and oversight. And industrial forest land is a good place to put it. In a recent Mother Jones issue, Bill McKibben, a famous environmentalist, said, we are in an unprecedented emergency and we need to care more about saving our planet than protecting our backyard. Two recent Massachusetts Attorney General decisions agreed the amount of solar power needed by 2050 exceeds the full technical potential of the Commonwealth for rooftop solar, indicating that the substantial deployment of ground-mounted solar is needed under any circumstances in order to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The Attorney General said the need for large-scale ground-mounted solar is so important to the public good that it's necessary to take away some measure of local control to limit this land use. The Attorney General said that neighborhood hostility or contrary local preferences cannot dictate whether solar energy systems and related structures are constructed in sufficient quantity to meet public demand. The Attorney General said, it's not okay to unreasonably regulate the siting of large-scale ground-mounted solar unless you can demonstrate it's necessary for needs of public health, safety, or welfare. Carbon mitigation is not public health, safety, and welfare. Forest protection is not. And protecting views is not a legitimate use of regulation which protects public health, safety, or welfare. The conclusion of this conference is this is the time and place to get on the same page and acknowledge research and science. We have a fraction of the solar available land that we thought we had, and the only way to achieve 2030 and 2050 climate goals is with a lot of ground-mounted solar. We need to start advantaging solar opportunities being offered to us. We need to stop making decisions based on feelings. We need to stop saying no to willing investors and to available sites. We need to build on rooftops first. We need to build on brownfields second, and on agricultural land, which is farms and forests, last. But we need to do it all before it's too late. Our planet depends on this. Forests and solar. We need both.